Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today, man.
Absolutely. Great to be here, Adam.
So where are you calling in from? Where's home base for you?
I'm in Frisco, Texas right now. It's a suburb of North Dallas. From Plano, Texas originally, which is about 10 minutes away from here.
That's awesome. So is your family still there?
Yeah, a big part of what I'll probably talk about here in a little bit is one of the reasons why I got out is to get out and come close, be close to home. And so the majority of my family lives here in the Dallas area, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm a huge fan of Texas, as is a lot of people, of course. Out of curiosity, have you seen kind of over the past, I don't know, few years, 5 years, I'll call it, have you seen like mass migration, or is that just news being news?
No, it's totally correct. I mean, you got a lot of organizations moving from California and in the West region in general, a lot from like the Phoenix area as well, coming to Dallas, Fort Worth. Obviously, no state taxes, which is always a benefit, but then, yeah, just a lot more room to operate. And it's just so great for families, particularly the North Dallas area, which I can speak very knowledgeably of. It's just a terrific place to start a family, to raise a family. I grew up here, born and raised in Plano, Texas. So yeah, it helps both personally and professionally with a lot of businesses coming this way.
That's awesome. And I love to hear that. I think deservedly so, right? Texas is a growing state. So I'm happy to hear you getting people from all over the country. Awesome. So we're going to kick off with your formal introduction. Ryan Brence is a United States Military Academy at West Point graduate. Following West Point, Ryan served for 8.5 years of active duty as an air defense, artillery, and civil affairs officer, both in the U.S. and abroad. Ryan served for 1.5 years in the Army Reserve 75th Innovation Command, part of Army Futures Command. Ryan is a proud Airborne Ranger with experience in the strategic, operational, and tactical levels throughout his service. Ryan's professional career includes experience in business development, operations, and team leadership roles. Today, Ryan is the Director of Sales for STC Safety, leading their Texas team, where Ryan lives with his wife and 2 daughters. Ryan, I am very excited to dive into a lot of this, a lot of things that I'm not familiar with, so I'm intrigued to learn about. But before we get there, just a congratulations on having 2 daughters. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's my biggest blessing, Adam. When it's all said and done, I mean, that was the dream of my life, is to start a family. And so I'm living the dream right now, as they say. But I say that confidently because I got 2 beautiful daughters along with my beautiful bride. So very grateful.
That's amazing, man. Love to hear it. All right. So as our audience knows, and as you know, we like to kick off in chronological order. Talk to us, as you just mentioned, being from Texas, talk to us a little bit about that childhood, growing up, and what led you to your service.
Yeah, so I grew up in Plano, Texas, like I said, a suburb of Dallas, and I was a coach's son. My dad was a high school football coach, and so I grew up playing sports. And when I got to the high school level, I started getting recruited by some smaller schools, but then the military academies started to come into play, and some coaches were starting to recruit me, and really I had some opportunities from United States Military Academy, Naval Academy, and Air Force Academy. But it was when I took my official visit to Army, the United States Military Academy at West Point, that just something about that place. I mean, it's one of the most historic landmarks in our country. But when I got there, something about me, my gut instinct told me, this is for me. This is the place for me. And a lot of that had to do with my host, a guy a current player for the football team at Army was hosting me. And he just had such a professional, but also personal feel to him that just really sold me on the idea of West Point. And so he's really the reason why I got in to West Point, or why I made that decision. And from there, didn't look back.
That's awesome. So, out of curiosity, did you also visit Navy and Air Force academies?
I visited the Naval Academy. I've been to Air Force Academy, but I didn't visit when I was in high school. I know all three of them, including the Merchant Marine Academy and the Coast Guard Academy, which I didn't get an opportunity to even look at, but they're all world class institutions, and I can say that just with ultimate pride and confidence because I mean, just the history of our country is stood upon these academies, and particularly West Point being the oldest one of them, established in 1802. It was a strategic landmark, back during that time, right after the Revolutionary War, and so it really dates back to our entire history of our country, and that in and of itself really was a selling point. But then for the opportunity to play Division I football at West Point and then get an incredible education, honestly, it was a no brainer. But I also didn't really know what the heck I was getting myself into either, Adam. So I
Yeah,
was definitely ignorant, but I was blissfully ignorant because it
yeah.
ended up being such an incredible experience for me.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. So, before we dive into your experience at West Point, um, was the draw to West Point like purely based off of recruiters, being at your high school and then you going there physically, or was there some other, I don't know, draw dynamic that happened?
It started with football, with recruiting, just because
Hmm.
I wanted to play ball in college. That was a big draw for me. But once I started kind of like doing some research and doing my homework on looking into the military academies, I started to really understand the benefits of the
Hmm.
educational component. And then from a service side, I was ignorant there too, but I started talking to more people that had been in the service. And I remember going to like my junior ROTC program and talking to one of the instructors there and just trying to pick their brains on what their experience was like. And after all those conversations, it really seemed to align kind of with my makeup as an athlete and being part of a team. And so that was really another factor that led to my decision making. And it ended up being so true once I got to West Point that was a great alignment in how I was developed.
I mean, listen, man, from my perspective, just hearing you talk through that process, right? That thought process, that research process. I heard you say, you were ignorant to XYZ. At the same time, I'm thinking, wow, you put in a lot of good research, good effort into learning about your decision, especially, I mean, considering you're, 18 or whatever, 16, 17, 18 at that point. So I want to give you a little bit of props on that, methodology.
Yeah, that's part of my makeup too. I've always been pretty pragmatic with my decision making, and so yeah, and that goes back to my parents too. They did a great job of raising me, and they gave me some great insight as well. Like my dad knew about the academies; they had recruited our high school many years before that, so he had some basic understanding of the academies, and he was very good about giving me his thoughts and perspective, but not letting me make my own decision.
Mm,
So it was just great to
that's
have,
awesome.
obviously, come from a great home.
That's awesome. Did you out of curiosity, did you have any friend kind of inspiration or family inspiration for military direction, or was it purely off of the sports and schooling dynamic?
Yeah, no. So actually, my grandfather served in the Army. He was a warrant officer. He was a flight mechanic or
Mm,
a pilot mechanic or aviation mechanic, excuse me. And so I had limited interactions with him. I say that he had a lot of stories about his time in the service, but it was kind of hard just with the timeline. Him serving during the Korean War era, he never went to war in combat. But that was a different time, and so I
mhm.
definitely picked his brain as well. And he is, I mean, he's deceased now, but definitely one of my heroes in my life, and so that definitely helped with my decision making. Was my grandfather.
Mm. Amazing, amazing. So I understand that the process of getting into West Point is pretty rigorous. Talk to us about that.
It is rigorous. For me, being an athlete, it helped kind of
Mm,
simplify the process to get in. However, you have to get a congressional nomination, congressional Senate, or from the vice president to a nomination. So, and that in itself takes some time to write letters, get letters of recommendations, go through interviews. Obviously, they look through your transcripts and your grades, your extracurricular activities. It is extremely selective, and it as it should be. I'm so proud of being a part of the long gray line, as they call it, at West Point.
Mm.
And so, hope to continue that distinguished legacy of, I just actually talked to a kid in high school that is looking to go there. And that was a great opportunity just to continue the pride and tradition of getting
Mm.
more great young men and women into the academies. And so,
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. What is, getting congressional slash whatever government body recommendation look like? I mean, how does that process even happen?
Yeah, you have to find your local congressman for in your district, wherever you,
Mhm.
you live and go to high school. And then, yeah, you write some letters yourself as to why you want to go to the academies. And then from there, I think there's a process of interviews and then receiving letters of recommendation.
Mm.
And so it can take usually you start the process when you're a freshman or sophomore in high school. But for
Wow.
me, it was able to kind of get expedited because I was an athlete, but I still had many hoops to go through to get in. But thankful
Mm.
I went through that.
Amazing, amazing, man. All right, so walk us through, what getting started at West Point looks like. Um, you know, for you also, right? You're moving kind of cross country, more or less. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, once again, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, man. I was going from I never really lived. I mean, I hadn't lived anywhere else, obviously, being a kid, but moving from Texas to New York was a change in and of itself. And and then you just go into this new environment. You're going to basic training, which in at West Point they call it beast barracks. So it's different than your typical Army basic training. You're not dealing with non-commissioned officers who are your trainers. You're dealing with cadets that are 2 years older than you. So it's a little different, but it's just got an aura, its own culture at West Point. I mean, they are
Mhm.
very by the book and strict, and they continue the traditions that have lasted for over 200 years. And so, yeah, it's a culture shock when you walk in there. It's called our day. Reception day is what they call it when the new cadets, the plebes, are coming in, and you got a lot going on for 6 weeks of intense basic training where they're getting you indoctrinated into the Army and West Point.
What was it different for you as an athlete there than students that weren't athletes?
Not really. We did have some time where we get to go to the locker room and be around the facility for the football facility, but for the most part, it was all in, just like all the new cadets. But I
Mm.
will say, and this is something I wanted to talk about, was just the importance of physical fitness. Of course, in the military, you got to be physically fit. But for me, coming in as an athlete, that was huge.
Mhm.
I mean, there was new cadets that didn't play sports at all that were in much better shape than me, running wise, and even just holistically. But that really helped me. It gave me a foundation to stand on and give me some confidence and really help my peers. Like I just wanted to be an encourager. I wanted to, do everything I can to get people up to speed. But that was a first indicator of kind of like, hey, this is like a good place for me to be. And it allowed me to kind of step into my leadership through physical fitness.
Mm. Yeah, amazing. So what was your typical, I don't know, month? Like what was your typical schedule look like going through, that program? And I guess to caveat that, was it different per year?
Yeah, so you get through basic training, or B barracks as they call it at West Point. That's 6 weeks, and then you roll into the academic year. You're what's called a plebe, or a freshman at West Point, and that's an intense year. It's just you gotta start as a follower, and this is one of the great things about West Point as a premier leadership academy is that you got to start as a follower because you got to learn how to take orders and directions, and learn from good and bad leadership and all in between to form who you're going to become as a leader. But all that to be said, when you're a freshman or any class at West Point, I mean, you are in an environment where everything is structured. You wear a uniform. You get up and go to formation in the mornings, and then you go to classes. You're a normal student, so you're going. You take a lot of credit hours at West Point, but it's a college. You're going to
Mhm.
college. But then in the midst of all that, you have some military components. They have some time for military classes and education. They'll have field exercises that are embedded into your schedule on the weekends. Um, and then for me as an athlete, each day at the end of the day, I would go to the football stadium and we would have practice. So I mean, you are running from sun up to sundown, but what else are you going to do? Like, it's a different college experience, but
Mhm.
for me, it maximized the amount of the time that I had. I had to use everything, all of my time, as wisely as possible.
Yeah, I mean, listening to it, I'm sure it's a difficult program, but at the same time, not much, if anything, is very rewarding without challenge, right? So, overall, it sounds like really just an amazing program, amazing experience. I understand that in summers, there's opportunity to do whatever it may be in the military at large. Is that what was your summers like?
Yeah, it was great. You have all sorts of trainings each summer, whether it's your field training exercises, or you can go to a unit and you're attached to an officer in the Army because you're going to become an officer once you
Mm,
graduate. And so I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I got to shadow a field artillery officer.
mm,
And that was a great experience for me just to see it live in action. And then also my grandparents, going back to my grandfather at the time, they lived right outside of Fort Sill. So that was a
mm.
blessing to get to spend time with my grandparents.
Wow, man, that's really cool. That's an awesome
Yeah.
experience. So, I guess let's move to toward the end of the degree or time there at West Point. When did you kind of realize what direction you wanted to take? Thereafter in your enlistment.
A lot of it was influenced by my peers, especially on the football team. A lot of them were going into artillery, whether that's field artillery or air defense artillery. And also it's kind of based off where you stand in your class, what selections you have
Mm,
available to you. I was in like kind of the middle to the lower end of the class. Not horrible, but um, I I ended up deciding to go air defense artillery because there were some other guys, teammates that were going in that branch. And so that was kind of the main reason why I went into air defense artillery to begin with.
mhm. Yeah, really cool. So, as we're closing out here on your degree, I'm curious what the overall football experience was like. Also, what position were you playing, by the way?
Yeah, so I was a strong safety on the defensive side of the ball.
Mhm.
I had a guy in front of me that ended up going pro, which was very unique at West Point. So
Nice.
that was tough. I was his backup, but I got to play on all the special teams, so I got some playing time. But yeah, we didn't have the best records while I was there, but we got to play some of the best teams in America. I remember playing
Mm,
at Notre Dame Stadium. That was an incredible experience, and then all the Army Navy games were absolutely incredible. I'll
mm,
just throw out the shout out for anyone that's listening. If you haven't been to an Army Navy game, mark it down on your calendar. Find a way to get there because it's one of the most American experiences you can ever have
mm.
in our country. And so those were absolutely incredible. So I had an absolute blast, and it was an incredible experience playing ball at West Point.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, man. I mean, just hearing about that, makes me realize how amazing of an experience that no doubt was. And I got to mark that down to go to a game. I haven't been to one. I've been to a Michigan game. My brother went to university there, undergrad there. That was cool. But Army
Big
Navy, I'm
house.
sure that's yeah, exactly, the big house. But I'm sure Army Navy is a whole different kind of experience. I'd love to go. Awesome, man. So talk to us about finishing your degree there and how that transitions into your enlistment itself.
Yeah, so everyone that graduates from West Point is commissioned as an Army officer, and you have a service commitment of 5 years. And to be honest, like when I was finishing up school, I wasn't thinking that I was gonna stay in longer than my 5 year commitment. I really enjoyed the Army structure, but you're already kind of thinking, all right, like, am I gonna get home one day? Am I gonna go back home after my 5 years? Like you're already kind of thinking like future, fast forward 5 years. They call it the five and fly. Um, but for me, once I made the decision, I went air defense artillery, and I remember going to my first unit and being a platoon leader. And I just loved that experience of being a leader. It was also extremely challenging because I felt a little bit out of place at first because you're a 22-year-old new lieutenant, but you're leading soldiers that have a much longer and broader experience within the service. And so
Mhm.
it's just it's a paradox that the youngest one of the youngest individuals is like leading the platoon.
Mhm.
But I kind of thrived after a few months of kind of getting my feet wet. I really started to enjoy that leadership position. And so I realized that, hey, I've got an affinity for this, and this is something that, I really love being part of this team environment.
Mhm. Well, what was, before even getting ahead of ourselves, what was the literal process of, getting to become that platoon leader? I'm guessing there was some time frame of training, whatever that may be. What does that look like?
Yeah, so back when I was going through, they call it the basic officer leadership course. So that was a 6 week course. It covers just kind of your basic Army skills, going out to the field, doing land navigation, basic riflemanship, just different various field tactics. Um, and then you go to your opposite officer basic course, which is your specialized training in your branch. And so I went to
Hmm.
Fort Bliss, Texas, and El Paso, and I was there for several months learning about all the air defense artillery systems. That was a long process. And then after that, I actually decided that I wanted to go through airborne and ranger school. And so that took even longer to get through. So all in all, the pipeline, which I added on to my pipeline, but it took a good
Hmm.
year and a half just to get trained up after 4 years at West Point. So I
Right.
say all that, sometimes you don't give yourself enough credit for the level of training that you have, but you really, when you get to that first unit and you look around and you see all these soldiers that have been deployed numerous times, hey, am I worthy to be the leader here? But you just
Yeah.
got to get through that process and cut your teeth, as they say, to
Yeah.
realize, hey, I can hold my own here. I got this.
Yeah, well said, man. And I like that realization of the amount of training that you put in to then become that platoon leader. Good to highlight, good to call out. What was the Ranger School like? I mean, is there a qualification scenario for that, or were you naturally qualified because of your pipeline in general to that point?
So you have to go through a physical qualification process, and then just to get into Ranger School, you have to get through a Ranger assessment phase,
Hmm.
and that's pretty challenging in and of itself, just from a physical side, from land navigation, and then just passing some various tests that they put you through. But once I got through that, which was difficult, then you're in it, and it's a 61-day course. I took the longer route and got recycled, and so I was actually there for shoot maybe 3.5 months because I got
Hmm.
recycled during the best ranger competition when they kind of shut down all operations. So I had to wait an extended period of time to start back up again. But
Hmm.
that taught me so much during that time. That was honestly probably one of the most pivotal time frames in my Army career.
Awesome. If you had, if you're able to kind of remember a little bit more detail, walk us through what that was like. I mean, you could start from the beginning, go through that whole process, or whatever extent you do remember.
I would say that I had to, as you can kind of hear from when I talked about being a platoon leader, I really struggle, and I still struggle with it today, kind of with this imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
You don't know if you're good enough. You don't know if you're a good enough leader, um, until you do it, right? And I was in the midst of just having to break through my own insecurities and a certain level of unknown when I was in Ranger School because I wasn't an infantry officer. I hadn't been
Hmm.
in that difficult of a training environment before. I was physically fit, like I talked about before, which once again was a huge foundation or a helpful part of me getting through Ranger School. But I couldn't just rely on my physical fitness and abilities because after about a week or two, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
you're the Hulk, you're going to get broken down and beat down. And it doesn't just affect you physically, it affects you mentally and emotionally. And so I was kind of at a low point when I got recycled in the mountain phase of Ranger School. And this is when I really had to do an evaluation of if I was going to stick it out or not. I had a choice to leave, but
Hmm.
had an interesting story, really from a faith perspective, that led me to believe that, hey, like God is with me, and I got some brothers around me that I can rely upon, we're going to help each other get through this. And that's exactly
Hmm.
what we did. And
Yeah,
so it's a
that.
story of perseverance and just resilience and grit, but also faith for me.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think undeniably so. It's perseverance, grit, and resilience, no matter who you are. And I recently heard a podcast with a Delta operator talk about kind of what you just said in terms of, yeah, you could be physically fit, but the reality is if you could do 200 push-ups in a row, they're going to make you do 201. So it's all about getting to that low point that you talked about. I mean, that's really the key is figuring out that you've hit that low point, recognizing that, and then just grinding it through. And like you did, right? And that's how you get out on the other side of it. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, man. So where we kind of stopped and then backtracked in your story was you got to your team as platoon leader. Talk to us about what happens in that situation, and then what happens next from there.
When you're a platoon leader, you're really in charge of the men and women that are a part of your unit. So I had, I think, between 35 to 40 soldiers that were under my direct leadership and command. So I was really looking out for their best interests, but then obviously all the equipment that we maintain, all of our weapons and weapon systems, and then really aligning with the plans, the commander's intent that was put in place from my the captain, the commander of our unit, really integrating and aligning with his any mission that was set up before us. And for us, the first unit I was with a short range air defense artillery unit, which was cool because it was more tactical, uh, more kinetic when it came to
Mm-hmm.
the types of weapon systems that we were dealing with. And so I really enjoyed that time. And initially, we were gearing up to go to Iraq, um, but then that got canceled. And so at that point, uh, they did some restructuring within our battalion, so the larger entity within our units. And then I actually got put into a Patriot missile defense unit where I became the executive officer. So I switched over my position from a platoon leader directly over soldiers to an executive officer overseeing the maintenance of all of our equipment and our personnel for roughly 85 soldiers. So that was a
Mm.
jump up.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing, man. What was that timeline like?
So I was a platoon leader for a little bit over a year, I believe.
Mm.
And then I transitioned into becoming an executive officer. When I was an executive officer, at that point, we did have orders to go downrange and support the airspace, defend the airspace rather, in Kuwait. So I was in
Mm.
Kuwait for about 6 months, and that's where that I talked about being kinetic beforehand. Once in a Patriot missile system, you set up this large missile system and radar system in Kuwait, and then really it's a matter of uh, being on standby, obviously being on watch in the airspace with it being so close to combat operations in Iraq. Is really a rotation of personnel to track the radar system. So if we had to deploy any type of missiles, obviously we're ready. But I did that for 6 months, and then I got an opportunity. I got selected to become a general's aide um,
Mm.
for the main Army Air and Missile Defense Command that is based out of Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we even get into that, going to Kuwait, what was kind of the workup like? I mean, what was that time frame? What were you guys doing to deploy?
Yeah, a lot of it was, and that was an experience for me having to shift my mindset, going
Mm-hmm.
from more of a tactical environment with more of the mobile forces and weapon systems that we had in the short range air defense to a Patriot missile system, which was very, fixed positioning, and really was based off the equipment and technology that you're working with. Um,
Mm.
I wasn't having to operate that equipment. I was focused on the maintenance of the equipment. And so really it was a matter of knowing all the ins and outs, all the different components and parts of your weapon system, which was a challenge. And I had to report all the statuses of that equipment up to my executive officer at the battalion level, And so you better believe I better be on point when given the status updates of all the systems. So that was a good challenge for me to shift
Mm-hmm.
over, but we had to make sure all our equipment was geared up and ready to go. And then you just talk about mobilizing the equipment, man, just, packing up and getting that overseas. That's a beast in itself. So that was
Oh,
kind
I'm
of the
sure.
lead up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I was particularly curious for that last piece that you just said, like the literal physical movement of the equipment, because I'm used to, reconnaissance, right? I mean, everything goes on your back. So can't imagine the difference in terms of getting that sorted. But I mean, that sounds like a lot of pressure in general, right? You're basically in charge for confirming systems are operational and good to go.
Yeah, it taught me a lot about accountability, right?
Mm,
Obviously, the accountability of people, personnel, and equipment. Um, and it also just brought out my team mentality. I had to do a lot of delegation, but also a lot of verifying and checking
mm,
myself and also and trusting people. So it wasn't just me trying to be the main holder of the list of everything verification wise. It was a team of soldiers that were helping me, making sure that we were ready to rock and roll as we
mm.
mobilized and set our equipment off, and then got down range, and then set up shop where we were.
Yeah, that's really cool, really interesting. All right, awesome. So you go through this deployment in Kuwait, then you have this opportunity to come back to Texas. Was it just like a quick decision? You leave Kuwait and come back to the U.S., or like how was that process? Talk us through that.
It kind of was because I mean you're talking about a 1 star. He was actually in a 2 star seat, so I mean that's
Mm,
pretty high. You got 4 stars. That's the highest ranks. I mean
yeah.
it's a big position, and really you talk about the different levels of command in the Army and really the military at large. You got the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. What you're doing at that's the highest level of strategic
Mhm.
command right there is at that general level. And so they needed someone, and he wanted the right person, and I aligned what he was looking for. So yeah, they got me out of there as quickly as possible, and yeah, so I went back to Texas, and man, what a incredible transition that was. Hit the ground running because this is the top general officer for the Army Air and Missile Defense Command.
Wow.
So they had units and soldiers all over the world, and this general was traveling to check in with all these units and leaders. Um, so I was traveling a lot over a course of a year in that seat as the general's aide.
Wow. So talk to us a little bit about that experience. I mean, give us some stories, give us some hindsight, retrospective thought, whatever it may be that comes to mind.
It all comes down to relationships. Like that's what I came to understand. The army is
Mm,
such a hierarchical bureaucracy. I mean, there's so many different levels of command and different units, but really being the right hand man of a general officer, it just makes you realize like I just need to really get to know who's who and who
mm,
is going to really support me to get what I need for my general officer. And it actually starts with the general officer themselves, like building a strong relationship with a general. You can imagine that I was pretty intimidated day one, stepping into that seat. I don't want to screw up for a general. So like I want to be on point and organized and ready to roll. Um, but from day one, my general officer was great. Like he was very personable. He also meant business, but he had a great kind of combination of that. And when you are so formalized, being indoctrinated, starting at West Point with just um, the etiquette of the rank structure in the Army, that was actually really relieving to me that he was personable. I was a first lieutenant at the time, and he's a general. And so it all started. I go back to just relationships. He built a strong professional relation and personal relationship with me that allowed me to feel comfortable
mm,
partnering with him. And then I wanted to emulate that by the way I establish relationships most of the time with higher ranking officers than me, with all these different entities and they call it S shops, or like support shops that support the general in his command. So I say all that like it's about relationships at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Were you a typical rank for that position, or was it usually someone higher ranking?
I actually ended up getting promoted during my time as an
Mm,
aide. So I went from first lieutenant to captain. So captain's the typical ranking for
right.
that position. But yeah, it was a great professional development experience, as you can imagine.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. So, as you said, you were there for in that role for about a year. Where does that bring you in your service?
So what's interesting about this all is during the interview process to become a general's aide, I told my general that I had a desire to switch branches of the Army from air defense artillery to civil affairs. And I thought that that was just going to discontinue the interview process for me, but he was actually very supportive. We're always looking to retain great soldiers in the military. And so he's like, as long as you're going to stay in, then you're on my team. You're part of the Army. And so I support your decision, and we'll work with you on your timeline and your pipeline to get over to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is where the Special Operations Command is, and where I had to go through the training process for civil affairs.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. By the way, I feel like you can get one extreme or the other. It sounds like you got the positive of the extremes, just supporting the direction that you wanted to go in.
Yeah, it was surprising for me, but that also solidified to me that hey, this could be a good person to work for and work under.
Yeah, awesome, man, awesome. So I guess walk us through what that process was like. You came to the back end of that year. You're going to civil affairs. How does that transition work?
Yeah, so you go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and it's a pipeline. They have three different branches within the Special Operations Command in the Army. They have Special Forces, Civil Affairs, and Psychological Operations. So I went through the Civil Affairs pipeline. Really, I think it's about a year and a half. It might be longer than that. I think it might be like 18 months total.
Mm.
But you start off going through language school. So I studied French for 6 months straight. That's all I did, which was a great time when all I had to worry about was studying French in the Army. So you go through language school, and then you start to get into the more specific training for civil affairs. And they start teaching you about the tactics and, what really like civil reconnaissance is and civil military type relationships. So you go through kind of a schooling process, like a schoolhouse, and then you go through like a big culmination exercise that I think lasted a month or longer. And that's where they start integrating you in with the other soldiers that are in the pipelines for special forces and for psychological operations. So incredible experience. Obviously, can't talk too much in depth because it's pretty top secret as far as what they do there, but I'm not giving away too much. It's an incredible program, and that taught me a lot about myself as
Mm.
well.
That's awesome. Can you explain what the general, I don't know, mission set, objective, purpose of civil affairs is?
You are essentially the liaison as the United States Army, the link to the civilian populace and key
Mm.
leaders wherever you are deployed to. That can be both internally at home in the States or abroad. So for me, I got a little bit of experience of both. Um, I ended up going back to Fort Bliss in El Paso to get attached to a functional unit, a conventional Army unit, the First Armored Division out of Fort Bliss. And so I got to go on a lot of training exercises with them and being a
Mm.
liaison to the local populace of El Paso. And then we actually got deployed to Germany, where that was kind of um, our starting point to have multinational training exercises all across Eastern and Central Europe, or sorry, excuse me, Western and Central Europe. And so I was helping coordinate and ensure that we had all the systems and equipment and everything needed for our civil affairs teams to go and
Mm.
interact with different populaces all across uh, the continent over there in Europe.
How did you even know about this, division like that you wanted to go there?
I was intrigued about being more kinetic. I've used that word. I just like air defense artillery is one of the most strategic and needed branches of the Army, particularly nowadays with all the
Hmm.
technology. Um, but I wanted to be out and about, moving around and dealing with different people. I think a lot of it comes from, I'm a people person. Um, I like interacting and building relationships. And so for me, I love the idea of being a liaison. And in fact, I'm doing that now when I'm doing, that's kind of the parallels, but like it's about finding connection points and understanding the true intentions of people and having emotional intelligence to understand, how can
Hmm.
we put the right pieces together so that one, we have the best interests of our country and our military, but we're also being great partners to our teammates, whether that be outside of our country or internally with non-governmental organizations or whoever we partner with.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting role, and that was a great way to explain it. I hadn't really been, I don't know, exposed or aware of that whole dynamic that you just described and that you served in. So it was really cool to hear it. And you just touched on it a little bit. I was already thinking this as you were talking through your service and your different positions and how you were describing them. That it sounds like you've made a really nice transition to where you're at now. And especially a lot of translatable skills, which is what we'll get to in a little bit when we get to the professional segment. But yeah, I just wanted to agree that I hear you talking about civilian profession through your military service, and that's really interesting as well. Awesome. So, how long were you in the civil affairs position?
I was in civil affairs for about 4 years
Mm.
altogether. And that was a
And
good mixture of I did 8.5 years of active duty, so half of that was in air defense artillery, and half of that was in civil affairs. So I
mm.
got a great mix of two different types of branches in the Army.
Yeah, amazing. So it sounds like you were mixed between North Carolina and Germany during that four
Yes,
plus minus period. Awesome.
North
Awesome.
Carolina, back at Fort Bliss, and I spent a lot of time in El Paso, Texas. Love that city. And then Europe, based out of Germany.
Amazing. Amazing. So I guess this brings us to or toward the end of your enlistment. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was in. Ultimately, I was in Germany for my last stint in the Army, or that was my last rotation. And at that time, I was starting to get serious with my girlfriend, now wife. And as I told you at the beginning of the show, my biggest dream is to have a family and ultimately stabilize and go back
Hmm.
home. And so at that point, that was really the driving factor of my decision to get out.
Hmm. Yeah, amazing. So at this point, are you still at that colonel rank, or did you also get promoted?
So I was a captain when I got out of the
Captain,
service.
sorry. Hmm.
Yeah, and then I actually, so when I came back into the civilian workforce, after about, after COVID occurred, I joined the reserve for about a year and a half. And when I was in the
Hmm.
reserve, I actually got promoted to major. So, I'm currently a major in the inactive ready reserve. So I'm not
Got it.
completely out. I still got a little toe in the pond of the Army, but I'm not in the reserve right now. So mainly
Yeah.
civilian.
Yeah, I see that. All right. So before we, get to that point, um, so you're finishing your enlistment, your last deployment is Germany. You come back home to North Carolina or Texas.
I came back to Texas,
Awesome,
El
Texas.
Paso. Hmm.
Hmm. And then walk us through the, kind of finishing that enlistment.
It was really good timing because I knew the timeline of us being over. I was overseas in Germany for about 6 months, and so when I came back, my leadership already knew that I had put in my paperwork to get out of the
Hmm.
Army. And at that point, you just go through a process um, of exiting the military and make sure all your paperwork and equipment is squared away, and then you head home, and it's you're out. And there's a sense of relief and excitement, but you're also it starts to set in like, oh man, this is a
Yeah.
whole new world out here. So I
Yeah.
remember that was at the end of 2016 when I got out.
Yeah. So what you started touching on is right that ultra difficult period. I laugh at it because I kind of just laugh at myself and my own experiences, and just still kind of recognition that struggles exist for a really long time transitioning. So talk to us a little bit about your transition period, military to civilian.
What was great about it was I was going home, and I told you I wanted to go home. I wanted to start a family, and so that's what I was most excited about. When it came to my vocation, what I was actually going to do, my career, that's where I didn't know what I didn't know. And it really just comes down to reaching out to people that you know and trust.
Mm-hmm.
I started with my brother. My youngest brother is here in Dallas, and he's in commercial insurance. And so he was my first touch point, and he did some connections for me, or made some connections for me. And ultimately, that's how I got connected with the owner of the current company that I'm with, which is a third party safety and health consulting company. And when I met him, he kind of painted a vision of needing someone with some operational experience in the safety capacity, which obviously my military experience translated to a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent. But he was also looking for someone that could spread the word and get the word out about the services, which is essentially sales. And
Mm-hmm.
he was looking for a good combination there. And I just felt like that was a good fit for me to just hit the ground running, you know? And so I didn't take a long time once I exited and made the transition. I think I started within like a month and a half, a month or month and a half
Mm-hmm.
after I left the military.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly quick, at least in my book. So in this overall, like we talked about, experience of transition, being not being specific to the literal moment or that month and a half, rather just generally speaking, transitioning into civilian profession, civilian life. Looking back, now that you have the knowledge you have today, like what advice would you give your younger self to transition simpler, better, easier, whatever word you want to use there?
You need to have a plan. I think
Mm.
what was difficult for me was, a lot of my end days of the military, I was caught up I was in Europe. And so I was part of a mission, and you're busy, and you're always going
Mhm.
to be busy to a certain extent. But if I look back then, I could have been more intentional about developing a plan for outreach and trying to reach out to people that I knew that had exited the military and talk to them about their transition and really start not only educating myself, but like tracking, like journaling, like writing down what I was learning so that I could have some connection points instead of just kind of landing in back in Dallas, Texas, and being like, all right, well, like, what am I gonna do? So I think I could have had a better plan, but hindsight's 2020. I also believe that God, puts you at the right place at the right
Mhm.
time uh, at times, but you can have some agency in that as well.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I'm literally, specifically asking for that hindsight,
Yeah.
thought process, advice, etc., with the intention of, our listeners and, people who are still, our service members who are still in enlistment, finishing their enlistment, etc., so they can hear this. People who already finished their enlistment, so they could hear this and apply it to themselves. So that's very applicable what you said, and I completely agree. If you just start that thought process, which really it's easy, right? Just write it down for yourself. Like what do you like about what you're doing? Start writing that down, and then you'll more easily understand where you can end up, where you can go. I think what you also brought up in terms of reaching out to people, especially nowadays with LinkedIn, man, like it's so easy, right? I mean, just create your LinkedIn. I mean, that'll take you 20 minutes, I don't know, less. Start reaching out to people. Start being interested in what people are doing. Look for veterans. Reach out to veterans, right? I mean, that's great advice.
Yeah, now I'm in sales, and I've had various roles in my civilian career. But what always strikes me, Adam, about just the power of initiating a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, you initiated this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and like there's power in this, right? Like we're propagating some messages here. And I think about just the importance. It doesn't have to be your career to be in sales, but like whatever you do, and if you're a serviceman or woman and you're about to get out, like just start a conversation because people aren't. going to just come to you. Sometimes you might
Mhm.
get lucky and they'll come to you and give you great insight and advice, but most of the time you have to raise your hand, or you're going to have to reach out. And I know that's difficult, and on multiple fronts. I'm talking whether that's professionally or whether that's you're dealing with mental health issues, or like whatever it is. Like there's just power in just initiating,
Mhm.
and that's true in life too. Like just starting whatever you want to do. But I think particularly going back to like relationships, how important that is. And it doesn't mean it has to be a deep relationship. It just needs to be a touch point that can help you get from point A to point B, where you're really trying to get to Z, but you got to start point A to point B. And so I'm just
Yeah.
always amazed by like the power of a simple conversation with where that can take you.
Yeah. Well said, man. I completely agree with you. Awesome. So sounds like you 1.5 months out, you're already gearing up to start this role. Walk us through kind of your career path to where you are today.
Started at STC, Safety Training and Compliance. We're a third party safety and health company that really works with high risk industries. So, particularly construction, which is our major industry that we support, as well as manufacturing, warehousing, industrial type companies. Um, so, did sales there for about a year and a half. And then I got recruited to go to a larger facility services company that outsourced mechanics of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing equipment. So I sold the outsourcing of that work for large commercial facilities or entertainment facilities, healthcare facilities, really a lot of different avenues there. Then COVID hit. And so once COVID hit, everyone's backs was against the wall. And for me, it was a point of transition where the owner of my current company, STC, reached back out to me and asked if I, wanted to come back and really be more active in our operations. And so at that point, I wanted to go from being just a sole uh, salesperson, kind of operating on an island, to getting back into the team environment. And so that's what I did. That was about 3.5, 4 years ago that I came back to STC. And even within STC, I've gone from being an account manager working with our clients directly to the area manager of being over our Texas team to now I am a director of sales. And so I've had various roles here back at STC.
That's awesome, man. I always am interested or intrigued by the dynamic when you start a career or whatever. You work for a company for some time, go somewhere else, really like learn more skills, gain more experience, and then that same original company recruits you back. I mean, I think it's a great kind of methodology and scenario. So it's cool to hear, how that happened for you and allowed you to grow into the role that you're in today. That's awesome. I want to give the opportunity to plug in right now translatable skills, military to profession, and where you're at now.
How about the team, right? I've always been a team guy, from athletics, from sports to the military, and now in an organization. And that's where I think the power of veterans just comes into play so much, or it's seen so thoroughly, that when veterans typically come into a civilian workforce, it's different, right? It's different for them, and it's different from the people that are receiving them, because veterans most of the time are all in. They're mission focused. They're about getting the job done, and how do I do my job to best support what we got to knock out. And that is such an awesome skill. That is an intangible that any leader of a company would just salivate at the mouth, like to have somebody like that, because it's different in the private workspace compared to, you're talking about life and death potentially in the military. It's different, but there's a need for it in the workforce. So I think the team environment is huge. Um, I think about the ability to operate between different levels. And this is where really my experience that I'm speaking to is, whether it was civil affairs or being a general's aide and having to navigate like higher ranking and lower ranking and all in between, bringing people together. That is a critical skill that has been huge for me to kind of operate as a liaison of some sorts between leadership and just like employees. Like you need to have a strong integrating force in the middle of that. And that's where I've kind of found a sweet spot, at least in the
Hmm.
civilian workforce. I'm not at the executive level yet, um, but I've really enjoyed kind of being this link that takes the strategy and vision of the executive level, and then someone's got to drive that thing down, and where the leadership might communicate and say, hey, this is what my vision is. At the end of the day, you got to like integrate that into the job to get done. And so it takes both leadership, influence, encouragement, uh, pinpointing where our gaps are and where we need to progress and what we need to work on. What do we need? What resources are needed? And all this stuff I was doing, Adam, in the Army too. You know,
Yeah.
as a lieutenant or a captain, like I was operating in that capacity. So that's where I really see a lot of the parallels from my point of view.
Yeah, really well said, man. And with your story in particular, with your military career and where you're at now, professional, civilian professional career, it's really, at least for me, it's really obvious, easy, whatever the right word is there, to see those parallels and how you're plugging in, your military learnings and skill sets into your civilian career. So I'm sure our listeners are going to be able to do the same, and it's really valuable, lessons learned and feedback. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, man.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I'll give as we're closing out the professional side here, I want to give you also the opportunity to plug in any career wins that you want to highlight.
My career wins have been the relationships that I've developed and the ability to continue to progress at this company has
Mm-hmm.
been an awesome experience for me to learn from other people, to learn from clients, to learn from my coworkers, to learn from my leadership. Um, I've just really enjoyed the journey of being able to operate in multiple roles and have multiple responsibilities and be a part of a company that's like still entrepreneurial and trying to grow and scale. That's been really fun. You have more flexibility and adaptability to do that. Um, a, a big win, or I've had multiple wins on this front of just building connection points with other companies where we not necessarily they're our clients, but like building partnerships. Like, how do we find companies that are in our same space that can bring value to our clients and actually help us with our service offering as a third
Mm-hmm.
party? So I really enjoy this idea of building affiliate partners. So, they might not necessarily be paying us. We're not getting paid by them, but they're bringing immense value to our space. And as well as I do, like in the construction space, like I mean, in any industry, like you need to use your resources as wisely as possible and as effectively as possible. And so,
Mm-hmm.
trying to find ways to optimize operations and our service offering for our clients, I really am proud of my ability to help connect dots with other organizations.
That's awesome, man. I love the comment on thinking outside the box, essentially, right, and leveraging similar you know similar whatever services, similar other companies that you can partner with and provide additional value. I think that's really interesting. It's not always this like competitive fighting everyone and everything. You can also provide value by connecting with other people on the same side of the fence per se, right? Client service client. So that's really interesting, man.
Absolutely. I think about the abundance mindset versus like a scarcity mindset. And that's
Mm,
something I have to continually remind myself of. It's like we got to operate from an abundance mindset.
yeah, yeah, not easy, not
Not
easy
easy.
to get your
Yeah,
mind there. Exactly.
exactly.
Awesome, man. So as we close out, final two questions of the show. We'll start with your wellness practice. What does that look like for you?
So I'm a Christian, and most days, I'm not perfect with this, but I start off my day with quiet time, a time of
Mm,
meditation. I use an app called Abide. You can look it up on your smartphone, but I have a 5 to 10 minute devotional that I listen to, and then I just try to say a quick prayer. And that sets the tone for the day. And then I typically, most mornings, do a workout. And so if I can get my blood pumping, my heart racing, and challenge myself, then I've already won and so
Mm.
I hit the ground running. And then another key wellness practice for me is walking. I love
Yeah.
to go on walks. Um, Ideally, if I can do that during the workday, that's awesome. Some days I intentionally try to put that in my schedule, like on my
Hmm.
calendar, that I'm going to take 20 to 30 minutes to go for a walk. And that just helps me get the gears flowing in my mind and think through things. Sometimes I pray. Sometimes I just don't think about anything and I just walk. And then sometimes I'll even get a coworker to come with me. But those are huge um, keystone habits in my wellness practice.
Yeah, I love those, man. I mean, the training, the exercise, that's, probably obvious to a lot of people. So I want to put that aside for a moment and highlight the two other practices that you mentioned. One is that quiet time. And in particular, I want to highlight the fact that you noted 5 to 10 minutes, right? And, I'm saying this, I say it to myself also, as you noted, not always perfect with it. Nonetheless, that's all it takes. You know what I mean? Like, you just set 5 to 10 minutes aside and you just do it and stop being lazy. And eventually, it will create results that are just super beneficial to you. And then last but not least, the walking. I always say underrated. I mean, it'll do so much for you, whether it's just, refresh your mind, refresh movement in your body, generally speaking, since a lot of us are, just sitting down for a lot of the day on the computer. So yeah, I'm totally with you, man, on those three practices. That's awesome.
For sure. Yeah, they've been great.
Awesome, man. So last but not least, any book or books you'd like to recommend to the audience?
I'm glad you asked. Yeah, I came prepared with that. I'm a
Nice.
voracious reader. I love reading. So I got four different ones on here, or they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
in the same. They're all nonfiction. Well, one might be kind of more fictional, but anyways, I'll start with, you probably heard of The Art of War
Mm-hmm.
by Sun Tzu, but there's actually a newer kind of, they flips it on its head, by Stephen Pressfield, called The War of Art. And that is a great book about going against conflict or things that are holding us back. Like, what is holding us back and how do we push through that? So I love that book. Another book that I recently read is called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg, who also wrote The Power of Habit. So that's a great read about the importance of communication. Another great one that we all read at STC, is called Impact Players by Liz Wiseman. It's great about teamwork and leadership in general. And then the final one is more of a religious book, but it's called Beautiful Outlaw, and it's about really the personality of Jesus Christ. And that's by John Eldridge. So
Awesome.
those are
Sounds
four.
like sounds like great recommendations. I appreciate you coming prepared for that,
Yeah,
and just yeah, you being a reader in general. So much to learn always.
for sure. It's been it's never ends.
Right, never ends. Yeah. All right, Ryan. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show to share your story, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam, for this time and for what you're doing with the show. It's really important. So really appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Thank you. So to close out, thank you to our listeners and our subscribers. A reminder to please subscribe to our channels, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build, and we will see you all soon. Thank you. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.